The call. It was a dark and stormy night when the phone rang. I had just settled into bed with a mug of hot cocoa and my favorite book when that ominous ringing pierced the silence. At first, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said tentatively. There was no response on the other end, just the faint crackling of static. "Hello," I repeated, my uneasiness growing. "Is anyone there?" After a few more seconds of empty air, I sighed and moved to hang up. But just as I pulled the phone away from my ear, I heard it. A long, drawn-out wail that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. It sounded almost human, but with an unearthly, otherworldly quality that made my blood run cold. I slammed the phone down, heart pounding. Just a prank call, I told myself. Some bored teenagers looking for a thrill. I tried to go back to my book, but I couldn't focus. The cry kept echoing through my mind on an endless loop. I shook my head, irritated with myself. It was nothing. Just kids messing around. As I finally felt myself start to calm down, the phone rang again. That piercing, shrill sound made me jump, and I stared at the phone with mounting dread. "Don't answer it," my inner voice warned me. But some morbid fascination drew me to it. Hands shaking, I picked up the receiver again. "Hello?" I stammered into the silent void on the other end. The silence stretched on, and I wondered if I had imagined the earlier call. But then, the wail returned, louder and more anguished than before. My mouth went dry, my palms slick with cold sweat. Something was horribly wrong. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep the quiver out of my voice. "What do you want?" Only the soft crackle of the open line responded. The wailing ceased abruptly, leaving behind a silence heavy with implication. Someone, or something, was out there, and they wanted me to know it. I hung up again and began to pace back and forth across my small apartment. I briefly considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That disembodied cries of anguish were coming through my phone line. They'd think I was crazy. "You're being ridiculous," I told myself firmly. "It's just a prank call." But despite my internal scolding, I couldn't stop obsessively checking the locks on my doors and windows. I pulled the curtains closed and turned off all the lights, casting the apartment into impenetrable darkness. I didn't want anyone or anything out there to see me. Exhausted but on edge, I crawled back into bed. But each little creak and groan of the old apartment made me flinch. I stared wide-eyed into the shadows gathering in the corners of the room, imagining unspeakable horrors lurking there. Eventually, my lids grew too heavy to keep open, and I slipped into unconsciousness. The next thing I knew, the phone was ringing again. I jolted upright, fumbling for the bedside lamp switch. My blinking eyes struggled to adjust to the sudden brightness as I grabbed the phone. An icy hand seemed to close around my heart. I didn't want to answer it, but my hand moved of its own volition. "Please, just leave me alone," I gasped into the receiver. A burst of static erupted from the earpiece, followed by a bone-chilling sound I'll never forget. The anguished, pleading wail of a child. My mouth dropped open, and I froze in shock and dismay. What kind of twisted person would force a child to make such a horrible cry? "Who are you?" I shouted. "Why are you doing this?" I strained to listen, hoping beyond hope I'd hear something to explain this nightmarish situation. But there was only that awful wailing on and on until I thought I would lose my mind. "Stop it," I screamed. "You're hurting her. Don't hurt her anymore." I slammed down the phone, breath coming hard and fast. Was someone torturing a child and forcing her to cry into my telephone? What kind of depraved psychopath would do such a thing? I had to make it stop. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The operator picked up on the second ring. I could barely get the words out as I choked out what was happening. Mercifully, she listened with compassionate calm, promising to send police right away. I sagged back into my pillows after hanging up, clinging to the fragile hope that help was coming. Exhausted and shaken, I dozed off again. The next thing I knew, Intolerable pain was shooting through my scalp as a large hand twisted into my hair. My head was wrenched back and my eyes flew open with a shocked cry. I thrashed and kicked against an immovable form looming over me in the dark. Hot breath brushed my face, reeking of decay. "You shouldn't have called them," a guttural voice croaked. "Now I have to silence you." A strangled scream rose in my throat as my terror mounted. "Please don't hurt me," I begged desperately. The thing above me only chuckled, a hollow, empty sound. "It's too late for that." I opened my mouth to scream again when suddenly the room was flooded with light. "Police, don't move!" The next few moments were chaos as the cops swarmed into my bedroom while I sobbed in relief. They pulled the attacking creature off of me, and as the adrenaline wore off, my blood turned to ice in my veins. Bile rose in the back of my throat as I stared wide-eyed at what had been hovering above me. It was not human. The pale gray flesh, sunken eyes, and double row of jagged teeth were straight from a nightmare. As the police dragged the writhing, wailing beast away, the world tilted around me. Once my apartment cleared out, I was left stunned and deeply shaken. Had I imagined the whole lurid affair under the strain of sleepless nights? But the throbbing pain in my scalp convinced me it had been all too real. I glanced again at the phone on my nightstand. Had that thing really used an innocent child's cries to lure me into its trap? I shuddered at the implication, skin crawling. I knew I wouldn't be sleeping anymore tonight. As I waited anxiously for dawn's light to wash away the lingering shadows, I vowed to change my number first thing in the morning. Never again did I want to receive a late-night phone call from the horrors that dwelled just out of sight. Some mysteries are better left unanswered.